I offer my love and my pranams at Bhagavan's Divine Lotus feet, and I thank him for bringing me here tonight. Also, I ask him to inspire me, and I pray that some of the things that I might share with you will be helpful in your own path to realization. You know, Swami tells us that there's usually a pattern which is followed by most people in terms of our spiritual growth, how first of all we'll hear about the avatar, and then we start investigating and reading about him. And as this progresses, then we decide to start trying to apply some of his teachings, and we do a little bit of service and so on. And as this goes on, pretty soon we get to the point where we like to say, "Oh, Swami, we want to, now I want to be completely dedicated to you, and everything I'm going to give to you, sacrifice for you." And so this situation then is what we would call, it's just sort of a start, because then the avatar likes to start testing us. And so then he finds out whether we're really serious or not about what we're doing, and if our dedication is as much as we say it is. And of course, this process then of testing and growing spiritually and trying to do more and more his work and bring him more and more into our consciousness daily is how we get to the point where we start questioning and asking ourselves, well, how is this about what he's telling us about being God, and how can I experience being God? How can I experience my true reality? And so what I'll try to do is lead you little by little through this process that has occurred in my own life, and maybe you can apply some of these things in your own lives, or compare them maybe and see what's happening in your own life. A lot of the experiences are sort of funny, and some of them are kind of pathetic too, I think, where I've missed the boat. But nevertheless, over a period of more than 30 years, I've been trying, and so this is important. We first heard about Sai Baba in 1979 when Indra Devi came to El Salvador, and she gave a talk. We thought it was about Hatha Yoga, or was going to be about Hatha Yoga, but she only spoke about Swami, and we were able to buy the book Sai Baba and the Psychiatrist, which was in English at that time. This was in El Salvador. And so after reading the book, immediately we decided to go to India and see if Sai Baba was for real. We have 2 children, and so we took our children with us. They were teenagers, and went to India. And the first experience was at Christmas time, and the Christmas that year was celebrated in Vrindavan. And so after the program, there was a program by the students on the life of Christ, and then also Baba spoke about Jesus. And the students brought in then the big plates of food and started serving the food to everyone. And Baba personally then gave a plate of food to all of us. And as we received our food, of course, we said, "Thank you, Swami." When I told him, "Thank you, Swami," he said, "It's my duty." And I was completely new to this, and it struck me as being very strange that a person of his caliber would say it was his duty to give me a plate of food, because at that time I was working with a multinational company, and I'd been to New York to meetings with the directors, and they'd never given me a plate of food. It was difficult even to give them, a handshake. And here I was in front of a person who was much more important and much more, how can you say, grand, and he said it was his duty to give me a plate of food. So that sort of started me then looking and trying to find out why he would say that. And as I started reading some of his books and so on, I discovered that he said, well, my life is my message. And so that was an important discovery. Later on, I discovered also that he said, well, your life is my message too. And so then this business about passing out plates of food and serving others, it looked like I was going to have to do some serving too. At this time, we were living in El Salvador, and we had a nice home, and we also had bought a home in front of the ocean. And the beaches in El Salvador are beautiful, you know, white sand, and we had a swimming pool. It was right in front of the water. And of course, you can imagine every weekend, the family, the kids, the friends, everybody was at the beach. It was like, you know, that was our God. And yet, if we were going to do service, it seemed sort of remote that we were going to be able to do service at the beach while we were enjoying the sun and the surf. So when my wife went back to India, I decided to sell the house at the beach, which I did. And there was a small volcanic eruption when my wife got home, as you can imagine. But at least we didn't have this burden, and so we could start dedicating some time on the weekends to service. And the service that we did at the beginning was very, very difficult because, at least for me, because I was thinking about the beach still. And I was thinking, you know, well, you were really a nut to have sold that place, and imagine going to see these old people today when you could be at the beach, and you know, you're like that in this dilemma. But little by little, as I got to know the people that I was serving, it became sweeter and sweeter, and I discovered that, you know, people actually look forward to seeing us. And we had this one fellow he'd fallen off a horse and he was paralyzed, and he was in the bed he couldn't move, he couldn't speak even, but he made noises. And when he saw us coming, he would start, you know, making noises and even move his hands a little bit. And we'd change his bed, and we'd feed him, and we'd shave him and everything. And so this guy's name was Felipe, and every weekend we'd go and see Felipe, and he was so happy to see us. And then we started, or at least I did, I started thinking about Felipe even during the week, and what would he like, and maybe something different to eat and everything. And started thinking in terms of, you know, it's sort of like learning to love, because you're not only thinking about yourself and making money and like this, but then you start thinking of somebody else in the world. And so that's sort of what happened to me. And then as things went along, was working more and more to do good works, do service, try to help others all the time. But that wasn't, you know, still quite enough. And so then I said, well, Swami, I really want to get to the point where, you know, I just say, I'm yours. I'll do anything for you. And then things started happening too, you know, because he starts testing. And so some of the tests, you know, when you fail a test, it's sort of, it's real disheartening. Once when they were having an education conference, and we were told it would be nice to invite the ministers of education from the different countries for this education conference. I think it was in the year 99. So I thought, oh, well, we could invite the minister of education from Cuba, because we were having trouble in Cuba. Our organization had been shut down there because we had a big birthday celebration once, and the people were out in the street dancing and singing bhajans, and there was about 600 people, and it was just a little tiny house. And the government got scared because they didn't know there were so many people doing one thing. And so the next day they arrived and they confiscated all the books and the pictures, and they made our coordinator there sign a letter that he wouldn't have any more meetings. And so then I thought, well, maybe we can get Fidel Castro to agree to authorize the organization if we invite the minister. So I called her on the phone, and she was interested in going to India, and so I thought, well, I'll ask Swami. So I told Swami, I said, Swami, can we invite the Minister of Education from Cuba for the education conference? And Swami says, oh, yes, invite her. And so I said, well, Swami, when should we go there to invite her? And then he pretended to be thinking, and he said, oh, do it at the end of the year. Go at the end of the year. So she was going, the minister was going on her Christmas leave about the 18th of December. So my wife and I had tickets to go around the 15th, I think, of December to invite her. And just 2 or 3 days before this happened, there was an incident where a little boy was rescued in an inner tube. He was escaping from Cuba, I guess, and the boat sunk, and I think his mother was drowned. And anyway, the U.S. Coast Guard picked him up, and they took him to Miami and turned him over to his grandparents. Now, just before we'd finished the interview with Swami, he said something very strange. He said, I'll be with you. And I thought, well, Swami, you're always with me. This is kind of strange. You're telling me you're going to be with me when I'm going to go to Cuba. But I didn't say anything, of course. And then when this little boy got to the Miami, then the political tug-of-war started between Fidel Castro and George Bush. And Fidel Castro says, well, we want this boy back here in Cuba because his father lives here in Cuba. And George Bush says, no, we want the little boy here because his grandparents are here. And then Fidel Castro says, well, if I get my hands on a gringo, I'm going to, trade him off for this little boy, and I'll throw him in jail if you don't trade him. And so then there we are with a plane ticket ready to leave, and I've got a U.S. passport. And of course, it's prohibited to travel to Cuba with a U.S. passport. And so should we go or shouldn't we go? And we were praying, and Swami said he'd be with us, but at the same time, those Cuban jails, you wonder how that would be, and then you're going to be there illegally, so the U.S. would probably say, oh, we don't know this guy, and they leave you to die in the Cuban jail. And so, my God, what should we do? And so at the end of things, we decided not to go. Now, when you fail a test, of course, Swami doesn't say, hey, buddy, you goofed. You blew it. When we went back to India, and I told Swami, I said, Swami, we didn't go to Cuba. And he says, oh, no. He says, don't go to Cuba. That's not good. He says that Castro's a very difficult person. He gave me a lecture for about 20 minutes on Fidel Castro and all the things that he'd done and how bad he was and so on. So he makes it look like it was okay. But just a couple of days before this incident occurred, Swami went over to the university and he gave a talk to the students. And when he was talking to the students, he said, well, when I was a little guy, in my teens, there was this family from Bangalore. And they had a couple of boys that were more or less my age, and they used to come and they'd sleep under a tree. And they were very dedicated, and they helped clean the compound. This was in the old Mandir. And they'd get firewood and everything, and really a wonderful family. And then he said that when the rainy season came, though, I had to tell them that they should go back to Bangalore, that they couldn't stay there because I didn't have any place for them, any shelter or anything. And so they went back to Bangalore. Well, this same family, they had a daughter, but she was older, and she'd gotten married to a German guy during the Second World War, and they lived in Germany. And one day when there was a bombing raid, the school where their children were going to school, the school was destroyed. And also, she couldn't find her husband, she couldn't find her children. It was everything, I guess, was just pandemonium because of the bombing and the destruction that was going on there. And so she was able to escape. And I guess she went to Canada or the US, I don't know. And she met some guy there, and I think she got married, but it didn't work out, and so she got a divorce. And then she wound up in Malaysia. And she also met another guy over there, and that relationship didn't work out either. And so she was coming back to Bangalore after a number of years to see her family. And so she shows up and she says to her family, well, here I am, and I've come to see you, and how's everything? And her family says, oh, you just got to meet Sai Baba, he's God. And we're going to take you to Puttaparthi right away so you can see God. And she says, well, I come to see you, but okay, let's go. And so they went to Puttaparthi. And they're in 3 days, they're there in the old mandir, and Swami doesn't say anything to them. And so then finally the last day they're going to go back to Bangalore. And Swami just says to this young daughter, or this daughter who's come, he says, go to Chennai, go to Madras. And that, in those days it was Madras. And that's all he said to her. And here's this, this teenage boy, and her parents say he's God, and she thinks he's just, some boy. And so they go back to Bangalore, and so then her parents start working on her and say, well, you better go to Chennai. When are you going to go to Chennai? And she says, oh, no, but I've come to see you. I don't know anybody in Madras. What am I going to go there for? But they keep asking her every day, and she says, no, but I'm not going to go there. And finally her mother says to her, honey, if you never do anything else for me in your whole life, please go to Madras. And finally she convinces her. So she goes down to the train station. They take her down to the train station. They buy a ticket on the train. She gets on the train, goes to Madras. She gets off, and she's there on the platform looking around. She doesn't see anybody. And so she goes over to the ticket window. She buys a ticket to go back to Bangalore, gets on the same train, and goes back to Bangalore. And when she's on the train, she gets into one compartment. She doesn't like it because the people are talking too loud or something, and she changes the compartment. And she sits down in a compartment. There's some guy there smoking a cigarette, and there's a couple of kids there. And so they just start talking, and pretty soon the guy asks her, he says, well, where are you staying in Bangalore? And she says, oh, I'm staying in the military compound. My husband was military. And he says, oh, do you happen to know a lady there by the name of Emily? And then she says, well, I'm Emily. And they look at each other, and it's her husband from Germany and her 2 children in that car. And then Swami says to the students, he says, when I say something, when I give you an instruction, if you follow it, he says, something will happen. But he says, if you don't, nothing will happen, life will go on. Of course, sometimes if you don't follow his instructions too, something bad can happen. I mean, there can be an accident or something too. But in any event, you see, when you're fortunate enough to follow his instructions, if you get a dream and he tells you to do something, well, do it. I had an experience, fortunately I did pass one test that got written up in that Satyam Shivam Sundaram, that some of you have read the number 6, you've probably heard this experience. But I went to India after knowing Baba for about 10 years. I was fortunate to go every year. And usually I would go with my wife, but this time I don't know why I didn't go with my wife. And I got there in February, and I was just going to stay for 3 weeks because I was working for this multinational company. And when the 3 weeks were just about up, I called the airline and I asked them to reconfirm my reservation, and they said, oh, we don't even have your name on the list, and you want to be on a waiting list. And I says, well, gee, I don't know. And then I went to the darshan in the afternoon, and Swami says, "When are you leaving?" And I says, "Well, Swami, I don't know." I said, my name was scratched off the reservation list. And then he has this really cute little smile, and his eyes get shiny, and he says, "I know." He says, "I'll tell you when you can go." And so then I thought, oh, that's really nice, another week's vacation, fine, So I called the office in New York, and I said, "Hey, I'm delayed, but don't worry, I'll be there in a week or so." And so the week went by, and he didn't say anything, and then I heard he was going over to Chennai, over to Madras, and I asked him if I should go with him, thinking he'd tell me to go. And he said, "No, come over to Madras with him." So I went over there. And then we were there for, I think, 10 days and came back. And then I heard he was going to Kodaikanal. So I asked him if I should go to Kodaikanal, also thinking he'd tell me to leave. And it turned out that he said, "Oh yes, come to Kodaikanal." And we were there 6 weeks, which was a tremendous blessing because I got to go in his house every night too. But still, there was no indication that I should go back, and I'm calling New York every week and telling them, I'm delayed and it isn't my intention to quit, but I haven't been able still to make a reservation and so on. And how do you tell these people that are only interested in making money? How can you tell them, "Hey, listen, God told me to stay," and that'd really go over big, then they would fire me quickly. And anyway, then Swami came back from Kodaikanal, and we went to Whitefield, and we were there in Whitefield, and I don't know, another 6 weeks or so. And finally I got a letter from the company, and a courier, and the letter said, "Now you don't have to worry about coming back because you don't have a job anymore." And so I tried to show the letter to Swami. Of course, he ignored me completely then. Swami, in the darshan line, and he'd go by with his nose in the air, or he'd turn the corner and go someplace else. But I was still going in his house at night, and one night he gave a talk to the students, and he said, the avatars don't always tell our devotees what they should do. That what they do is they give a sign, and then the devotee has to be astute enough to be able to realize that it's a sign. And then not only that, but the devotee has to be también, has to also be astute enough to be able to interpret it, and not only realize it's a sign, but to understand what it means. So anyway, after the talk, I went outside in front of Swami's house, and I was sort of praying that if he gave me a sign as to what to do, to help me to, first of all, realize it was a sign, and then second, to be able to interpret it. Because by this time I was thinking, oh, maybe he wants me to stay in India, maybe he wants me to be a teacher in a college, or maybe he wants me to move here, or maybe he wants me to be a renunciant and go in a cave and live or something. All these things going through your mind, you don't really know what you're supposed to do, and of course he's not telling you. So anyway, when I opened my eyes, after praying, I looked down at my feet, and there was a 5-cent coin from India, the 5 paisa coin, on the ground right between my feet. And this was right in front of Swami's house, right by his door, and I picked it up, and I thought, gee, this is sure strange to see a coin here on the floor, even though it isn't worth anything, but they sweep there about 3 times a day. And so I just picked it up, and I was just throwing it in the air as I was walking back to my room. And then I thought, 5 paisa. 5 is a number. It could be a date. And it was coming up the 5th of June. I got there in February. And I had one of these tickets that was a 45-day excursion thing that was only good for 45 days. That was long gone. I had a visa for, I think it was 90 days that was already expired. And I only had $30 left, I think, too, but I wasn't worried about the money because I knew Swami could materialize money in case I needed it. So anyway, but the 5th made sense because I thought, well, I'll call the airline tomorrow and see if they got reservations. So I called them, And he said, no, we're full and overbooked, and if you want to be on a waiting list. I didn't tell him my ticket was expired. And so I said, no, I don't want any reservations. But when we got to the 5th of June, Swami was leaving Whitefield and going to Puttaparthi, to Prashanti. And so at that time, when Swami leaves, he gives Padnamaskar to all the students. And so I was right at the end of the line with this, where the students were giving Padnamaskar, right by Swami's car. And so I asked Swami, when he got to me, I said, Swami, should I leave today? Should I go back? And he didn't say anything at that moment. He turned around and started giving Padnamaskar to the students on the other side. And then I heard, yes, yes, yes. But by that time, you don't know whether he's talking to you or whether he's answering somebody else's question. But I thought, well, because I heard it very clearly, I thought, well, I'll give it a try. So I went to the local airport, and I didn't have any trouble getting to Delhi. And when I got to Delhi, the airline was overbooked, just like they'd said, and there was about 25 of us that were waiting after they dispatched all the passengers. And then some lady came out from behind the counter, and she said, okay, all of you who haven't been able to travel with us tonight, please give me your tickets, and we're going to endorse them over to Air India so you can get into Schiphol tonight and then take your ongoing flights. So they took my expired ticket, and they endorsed it over to this Air India, and then also they gave me an ongoing flight into Central America, a boarding pass, so that didn't have to pay a cent for the airplane fare, and somehow I got stamped through the customs with an expired visa, and so I didn't have any trouble in that sense. And when I got to Europe, I called my office in New York. I told my boss, I said, well, I'm going back, I'm coming back now, and I'll go into the office on Monday, and you can, tell them to make out my last check. And so when I went to the office then on Monday, he didn't say anything when I called him in Europe. When I got back to the office on Monday, there was nobody in my seat, in my desk, and all the employees were very happy to see me. I had 300 employees. And I looked at the results, and everything was much better than when I was there. So then I called New York, and I said, well, I'm back, what should I do? And so then they said, my boss said, well, we've been studying your case, and we've decided to give you a 25% wage increase. I said, how much? Because in the good years, I'd only get 5%, and here's 25% for insubordination. I almost fell off my chair. And then he says, oh, and we've decided to pay you all the time you were in India as a paid vacation. Oh my God, it's raining money. And then he said, oh, and also we've analyzed your situation from last year, your performance, and we've decided to give you a bonus. So you can see what happens when the grace of the avatar hits. It hits so hard that you can't even believe. I mean, it's impossible. It's just, you can't even conceive it. How it's like this father and the children in the train, It's impossible. How could it be? And how could it be that these people that are just living for money, to make money, that they would give so much money to somebody who hadn't performed? Well, that was one test that fortunately I passed. But, the thing is that Swami also says that all of this work that we're doing to try to improve ourselves, the meditation, the repetition of his name, the service activities, everything that's in the code of conduct that we really try to apply to our lives, that's only 25% of it. That's only 25% of the game. And the other 75% is introspection. Now, how is this? Why? Let me try to explain why. When my son, I think, was about 16 years old, and we'd been going to India for 3 years, I think, at this time, when Swami called in an interview and he asked Eric, he said, what do you want? And Eric said, oh, I want liberation. Well, you know, he'd read a few books and had the idea, so I think he gave the right answer. But so then Swami says, well, what's liberation? And Eric said, oh, liberation is union with you. And then Swami said, well, who am I? And then Eric says, oh, you're God. And then Swami says, well, how do you know? And then Eric said, well, how can you explain God? And Swami said, you don't explain God. You have to experience God. Now listen to this, because this is so important. You have to experience God. He said, you're seeing me as different from you. But he said, yes, I am God, but you too are God. And then he said, and I'm aware of everything that you're doing, that you're thinking. I'm above you, below you, around you. And so then he went on to explain how important it is to realize God through this experience, through this internal experience. And this is the 75%. This is the part that we have to work so hard on to get there. Now, in my own case, you know, you sort of like to have Swami tell you at some point in time that what you're doing is correct, and you want to be reassured that you're going to somehow get to the goal. And so, of course, I was doing a lot of meditating and introspection and so on to try to find out where this divinity was that supposedly I am. Not supposedly, that I really am. And so one day Swami calls me in, and with my wife too, and he says, I'm going to give you a house. Oh my God, Swami, thank you, a house. Oh, thank you so much, Swami. What do you say? Swami, when are you going to give me the house? Where is it going to be? You know, you can't say that. He's not going to answer you like that. So you say, oh, thank you, Swami. Well, so then your mind starts working, you know. I thought, well, you know, we got this nice house in El Salvador, and it's true we sold the house at the beach, but we're not going to get another house at the beach. So maybe there's going to be a big earthquake and the house is going to fall down and he's going to give me a new house. Or maybe he's talking about maybe the terrorists are going to come in and they're going to take over the country, and then he's going to give me a house someplace else, maybe in India. Or then, you know, at that time also there were those little bungalows in back of Swami's residence in Whitefield. So then I thought, well, maybe he's going to give me a house in back of, you know, inside the compound, because he was letting me go into his house at night and listen to the lectures and all of that. And so you know how your mind works. And I thought, oh, no, maybe he's going to build some houses there close by in Prashanti, and he's going to give me a house over there. But, you know, 17 years went by, and there was no house. And so then one day I thought, you know, my God, what if he's talking about a spiritual house? You know, what if it's not a mortar and brick thing? What about if it's a spiritual thing? You know, you remember, like in the human values things, they show us the house that has the foundation of self-confidence. And then the walls, you know, you have the walls of self-sacrifice and self-satisfaction. And the roof, self-realization. But in my case, he's still working on the roof. So I think the roof has a whole bunch of leaks in it because it's not working yet. But at least there's, he said he was going to give the house. So at least there's a hope. And then another time he said, he said, I'm going to give you free airplane tickets. Oh, really, Swami? Oh, it's free airplane tickets. That's great, And so then the next couple of years, every time before we were going to go to India, I'd wait till the last minute thinking, maybe I'd win the lottery or some tickets would come flying in from someplace. And that didn't work. But then one year I asked him, I said, well, Swami, when should we come back? And he says, well, come for Kodi Canal. So I came in early April and with my wife, and we were there. And every day Swami would come out on the veranda and he'd joke with me, and he was really friendly and overly giving me more attention than usual. And so then my friends on the veranda were saying, oh, Swami's going to invite you to go on the plane with him to Kodi Canal as his special guest. And so I thought, oh, that's great, I hope, hey, maybe that's the free ticket, the airplane ticket that I'm going to get, And so then we heard that Swami was leaving the next day. And that night, Saroj, who some of you may know, who's in charge of the overseas canteen, she's a lady that I hardly ever talk to her. I don't really have any occasion to talk to her. And she came up to me right when I was going back to my room, and she said, she said, when my husband was alive, she said, one time, we were in the room at night, and we heard a knock on the door, and somebody from the office came, and they had 2 tickets to go on the airplane with Swami. And it was such a wonderful experience. And why is she telling me this, But then when I went back to the room, I told Rosie, I said, hey, we better leave the door open. If somebody comes from the office at night, we'll make sure that we hear the knock, and get those free tickets. Well, nobody knocked, and Swami took off for Kodi Canal the next morning. We were there without a taxi. It took us 2 days to get to Kodi Canal. So, he knows how to whittle down your ego, too. But anyway, then I thought, my God, those airplane tickets could have been spiritual tickets, too. Because you remember how Swami says that you see this airplane flying in the sky, and the pilot is God. And this plane, it comes down occasionally to take on passengers at designated points, but it only takes on passengers that have a ticket. And then it takes off again, and supposedly to go to Vaikuntha or someplace. Now, then hey, I'll buy that. That sounds like a good airplane ticket. I hope he gives me one of those. So anyway, those are the hints that he's given along the way. And sometimes he's even more specific, and he tells people they don't have to come back again and things like that. But in my case, that didn't quite happen. He started materializing the lingam again in around 1999 or 2000 in Shivaratri. And so the first year that he did it, I wasn't there, but the next year I made it a point to be there, because he told all the people that saw him produce the lingam that they didn't have to come back again, that they were liberated. And so I think it was in 2000 or 2001, I was there for the Shivaratri. And I saw the lingam come out of his mouth. And I was the happiest man in the world. I thought, oh my God, that's it. I don't have to come back. I made it. Free. And must have been walking on air for a couple of days. And then he called a group of people in, and somebody asked him, they said, Swami, this year in your discourse, you didn't say that everybody that saw the lingam was going to be liberated. And Swami says, oh no, this year I made an Atma Lingam. And that means that everybody that saw that has got to do a lot of service, and they're going to be doing a lot of good service activities. And so when I heard that, oh my God, I got to start all over again from scratch. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun. And what's going on is just unbelievable, even after Swami's left his body. I'll even tell you one story from Haiti, because I see we have a couple of volunteers here. Maybe is there more than two? Isabel and Angelica that have been in Haiti as volunteers. Well, about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, we'd made some identification badges for our workers in Haiti, and they said volunteers. But these people, we were actually paying them a salary, and so they were protesting a bit because their badge said they were volunteers. And one of us took them, one guy even took us to the labor court and made a complaint that he wasn't a volunteer, that he was a paid worker. And so we were served a subpoena to go to the labor court and get this case straightened out. And so when our volunteer went there, Rosa was there, and I don't know, were you there at that time? Yeah, okay. Anyway, when she goes to the judge, on the outside of the door of the judge's office, there's a big photo of Swami in Haiti. Unbelievable. And they go in front of the judge, and she dismissed the case as not being even worthwhile listening to, in our favor, of course. But the idea that, you know, Swami has penetrated so many places, so many, I mean, just in places that you can't even believe how he does this. And then what's happening in Prashanti even, you know, how now where we don't have him physically, but people are having so many experiences that, I'll tell you one that happened to me that it's really amazing, but I've heard so many of these that from other people that I realized I wasn't hallucinating. Swami had given me a ring, I guess 30 years ago, that had his photo on it. And the photograph was one of these little enamel things that had gotten busted, and also the ring had broken in 2 parts, and I just had it on my altar for all these years and never done anything with it. And so then I was thinking right before I went to India, I thought, well, maybe this thing can be restored. And so I'll take it to India, and I know the jewelers there that also are devotees of Swami, so that I know they won't do anything, you know, change the metal or something with it, because it's this metal with five different metals in it. And maybe they can put this thing back together again. So I showed it to Sai Binod, is the name of the jeweler, and I asked him, I said, he comes there maybe once every 2 weeks or something, just for a day or two. And I said, well, Sai, can you fix this? And he sort of made a face, but he said, well, I'll take it to the shop and see what they can do with it. And I gave it to him, and I forgot about it, and it had been at least a month. And of course, Sai Binod isn't there every day. He comes, like I say, once a week or once every 2 weeks. And so one day I was sitting in the darshan, in the Samadhi darshan, and all of a sudden I had this feeling that Swami was going to appear in his chair. And I really felt that like he was going to appear physically. And not only that, but that he was going to materialize a ring for me. He was going to call me, and he was going to do it very subtly. He was just going to sit there, and he was just going to move his finger just a little bit. And I was going to go like that, fast. And then he was going to materialize a ring. And then I started thinking, my God, are you going off your rocker? You know, you're hallucinating. This isn't possible. And then after the darshan was over, after the bhajans were over, and I get up, then I see Sai Binod had come in and sat down behind me. He hadn't been there. And then he says, oh, hey, I brought your ring. And when he showed me the ring, it was the most beautiful thing. It was like when Swami, because this thing was, now it was all tarnished and it was broken in 2 pieces, like I said. And when Swami had given it to me, the ring had been shiny. And now when he gave it to me, it was so, they cleaned it up. It was so shiny, it was like, looked like, sterling silver. It was so beautiful. And a new image of Swami in the ring. Oh, it's just gorgeous. And so then I thought, my God, Swami was really appearing. And he did it at Christmas time this time too, because this year there was a lot less foreign people at the ashram, as you can imagine. I think this year we only had 54 children, and the prior year we'd had 250. And the adult choir, the last year we had 1,500, and this year there was 175. But the music and the presentations were so beautiful, were so well executed, that Swami, I'm sure he made not only the directors, but the children and the adults that participated, each one feel like they were divine. Like you could see how, somebody who only goes there and they practice for 10 days, and all of a sudden they're singing like angels, and singing together in harmony, and bringing out such a beautiful program, and they say, my God, something's happening. That something is greater than I am that's doing this through me. So then, in this way, we discover that we are really something much, much greater than what we believe. And Swami tells us this. He says, but you have to experience God. And this experience of God is experiencing our own divinity, our own divine nature. And as we are applying ourselves to doing better and better every day, to helping more people, to looking for ways to love others, then we will see how this divine energy flows through us and makes us into divine beings. And this is part of this investigation process. This is part of the 75%. Is creating a world that is a world of love. And the other part of it is to understand how to live in the present right now. Because as Swami says, the past is already gone and the future is uncertain. And time itself is something that we have difficulty understanding, because time is created by a planet, by a solar system, and by the rotation of the planet that we're on, and so on. But time in itself is not real as such. And then also we have to understand our position or our reality in relationship to all that has been created. You see, we live in this amazing galaxy with something like 200 billion stars in it. But this is only one galaxy. And then if there's 400 billion or more galaxies in the universe, then it becomes mind-boggling, the size of the creation. And it must have required some intelligent entity to create something like this. But at the same time, this whole universe only exists when we're looking at it, when we're aware of it. And it doesn't exist beyond that. In other words, we create it because we're seeing it, or we're hearing it, or we're touching it. It's something that we're creating. And then when we're not there, when we're not touching it or doing something with it, it doesn't exist. Although it may exist for someone else because they're creating it with their mind. But you see how everything really is, it's an instantaneous thing that is only lasting very temporarily because of our thought process. And because we've been educated and because our minds have been educated to think that things are permanent. But they're not. Everything is transient. And we are the creators. We're the ones that are creating all this. So why not create a world with love? Create a world filled with love. And this is what it's all about. So we can change our lives completely. And the way to do it, the way to get there, is just look inside and try over and over and over again to crack the rock so that we can experiment this divinity that we are. But don't feel like my son did at that moment, like I'm here, God is there. We're not separate. Don't try to understand. Try to experience. That's the key. So maybe now we're going to open this up a little bit for questions. I'm certainly, like I said, the roof on this house is, it's not even close to being finished, so that I don't know that I'll be able to answer all the profound questions that you have, but maybe if I can try to help you with something that's going on or that we're doing with the Sai Organization and also outside of the organization, that it'll be a pleasure. Oh, you got two, okay.
I have a question. When your son asked to Baba that he wants to merge with Baba, what was his answer?
No, he didn't.
He wanted to
He said he wanted liberation.
Yeah, so what was his reply, final reply?
The final reply was that Baba gave him a big hug, and he says, "I will give you liberation." That was at the end of towards the end of the interview. And of course, you don't know when that will be, whether it'll be in this life or the next life or whatever. But it made him feel very good.
I would like to know if you see the possibility to help the women in Haiti to learn some trades, if we can help in any way so that they can help themselves. When I was there, I got a sewing machine and they were very enthusiastic about learning how to sew. And I think that there is so much here that we could maybe help out in some ways to help them.
Yes, this is really a good point. We have been receiving help from the World Foundation. And when Swami was still alive, he told us, first of all, when right after the disaster in 2010, in January, he said that the World Foundation should get involved in Haiti in helping the people after the disaster. And of course, the immediate goal at that time was feeding people, and also we actually built a few houses and repaired a couple. And then we started a program with education in human values also, and we had a lady who had graduated from Thailand in the values, and she had started a complementary school there, which means a school that wasn't registered with the Ministry of Education, but they were giving human values classes every afternoon to some children, about 80 children. And also we started a program with scholarships for some of the little children. And then, as Angelica said, when she was there, she got a sewing machine and started showing some ladies how to sew. This self-help is a very, very good service, and I think if we had the volunteers in Haiti that were able to do this and willing to do it, it would be a good starting point, maybe to work with them with sewing and get some sewing machines in there and do that. Really, we're not so limited in what we can do except by more or less from the volunteers that we have available. And the situation in Haiti, it's not so easy to live there. They don't have much infrastructure. There's very few paved streets in the city, and only about 20% of the children go to school. So you can understand that there's a very low level of education, but the people can learn a trade, and the people are very good. I mean, people are not that violent or that bad. There's only one policeman for every 10,000 inhabitants, so you can imagine, you know, they can't be all that bad if there's no policeman. Although I think the United Nations and their the security people are also looking after the order so that it's not complete chaos. But also most of the Haitians, they have their own agenda for trying to stay alive, and they don't think stealing is bad, and they don't think anything goes really, so you have to be really on your toes when you're dealing with them. But this idea of helping them, I think it's a good idea, Angelica, and we should look into it and try to do more. I agree. We haven't been doing too much of that right now. That hasn't been our push. Our push has been to keep feeding them.
I'd like to get back to another subject that I'm not sure exactly how to ask the question, but it comes to me this way, that you say we create our own universe, and yet you also say that you seek to have a condition where you're not born again. And in one sense, you have to strive for the last part, to get into the condition where you're not born again. There are some steps, like the house you mentioned. And you say that is incomplete, and yet we live in this immediate presence. On the other hand, we live in this immediate presence. We create that immediate presence. Why is it that we would not want to continue to create as we have created, continuously, throughout all time? Why do we not want that condition? Why do we not want to, quote, be born again? What would be the reason for that, if we are truly the creators of the instantaneous moment?
Yeah, this is a very important question, because I think at some point in time we all have to experience pain and suffering and other things that are created even by our own minds. If we look at our situation and we are suffering, even the diseases that we have or the sicknesses that we have, these are actually created in the mind, and they come to us through the mind first. And then they get into our bodies, and we wind up suffering. But we're suffering for a reason, and when we discover why we have created this sickness in our bodies, then it's much easier to get rid of. The same thing is true with any other kind of suffering, that we may have mental anguish because our husband has died, or because one of our children has gotten sick, or been kidnapped, or who knows what. And so then these situations that we're living are obviously, they're created by our karma also, by our past lives, past actions. But these past actions it's our mind that's bringing these up. It's our vasanas that are bringing these up into the present. And so this suffering and this dissatisfaction with what we're doing with our lives then creates the desire to discover our reality and not have to be reborn and continue to suffer. That's the way I would answer it.
Sarah, there is nothing but divine. There is, even in our creation, is all divine. Is only God. Our misunderstanding that there is this, all these things and people and animals and creatures is only our misunderstanding. So, isn't really, even the disease that we create is all created really by the divine. Even the karma is divine. So isn't that all just gifts that showered on us in order to help us grow spiritually and become conscious of our reality? And this consciousness, it seems to me, is only abandoning this opinion that we have of who we are and embracing the reality that we are, which is there's nothing but God, so we gotta be God.
Yeah, the Swami explains it in this way. He says there's three states really: conscious, and conscience, and consciousness. And the first conscious is to be conscious of, say, the physical world and what we do on a physical level. And then conscious is where we have this idea or connection with our reality, with our Atma. And consciousness is the divine. That's the Paramatma. That's the only thing that really exists, is consciousness. So, as you say, this whole problem that we're suffering and that we're living in a world, a material world, is ignorance, because only consciousness exists. And so this consciousness is obviously, it's the divine. We're sparks of that same consciousness. As Swami has said, that in the beginning there was no one to know who he was, and so he multiplied himself and made himself many. So we're part of that consciousness that is manifested. Now, I was curious in asking some students also, Swami students, about whether or not he had at some point said, or that they'd heard him say, that this consciousness is, let me see, that the consciousness is always available, always there for us, that it's never not there, but that we, in our ignorance, have come to believe, you see, that everything that surrounds us, the material world, is real. And it's real, but it's unreal, if that makes any sense. It's unreal in the sense that it's always changing, and it's not permanent. And it's real in the sense that it's part of consciousness. So I don't know if all I've done is confuse, but really everything is divine, and everything that happens to us is His will. And as we say, okay, Swami, we are yours, this is our ability to realize that everything that happens to us is His doing, and we should accept it and be happy that it's His grace. And His grace can take the form either of something, what we feel might be negative, or something that's positive. But if we see that He's doing everything, then we've really surrendered. It's a complete surrender when we understand that it's all Him. He's doing it all.
And it's all us.
Yeah. And it's all us too. Yeah.
Just very quickly, did you ever hear Baba talk about the golden age and all this hype about 2012 and all the changes in any shape or form as with transitioning from consciousness to unconsciousness and all the good stuff? But what is, I mean, have you ever heard of?
Well, yes, in the discourses that I think that everyone's heard in it, that He said, in 25 years or 26 or 28 years, depending on when He gave the talk, He said that there would be a golden age in which there'll be peace and harmony in the world, and there'll be love and so on, and the nations will be at one with one another. That specifically about 2012, there in one discourse that's printed in Sanatana Sarati, Swami, in this discourse, he started, I think it was around 2010 or 2009, but he started giving the names and the significance of each year until 2020. And then he said, after he gave the significance of each one of the years, he said that those who live until 2020 will all be realized, or like, if you get that far, you've made it, that kind of a statement. I wish I had the exact quote, and I don't even remember which Sanatana Sarati it's in, but it was a very interesting discourse, and it gives the significance and what may happen in each year, like it may be a year of a lot of violence or a lot of natural disasters or whatever. He has given that kind of information for each year up to 2020. Okay, so thanks, Swami, for everything. And thank you all.